Alrighty. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Career Catapult podcast. This is one of those episodes you're either going to love or you're going to hate. Either way, it's going to challenge you, it's going to make you think. Okay, this is for those of you who are currently looking or aspiring for your next internal promotion. After all, what we do here is talk about how to get you promoted so that you can have more money, you can have more impact, you can actually have the career that you came here to have. Okay, and so we oscillate often between internal promotion conversations and external promotion conversations because they're a little bit different. Okay, so today we're going to focus on the internal promotion. This is for those of you who are in an organization you quite like. You want to stay there for a while, but you don't want to stay at the same level. You want to keep moving up, okay? And I'm going to talk to those of you who are at least in the middle of your career, so you are at least a senior manager and above. That's what we do, is really get you from that middle point of your career all the way to the top. And that's what this topic is going to be focused on. So today we're talking about what we just need the right role really means. I'm doing quotes. If you're not watching and you're listening, I'm doing air quotes here. We just need the right role. Okay. Whenever you're talking about your promotion conversation with your leadership and they hit you with that, like we're just waiting for the right role and the right time and all things. What does that really mean? Okay. What is that code for? That's what I'm gonna unpack for you in today's episode. So buckle in. I'm going to give it to you straight because at this level, you are accustomed. You don't need me to waste your time. Let's just get into what I really want you to know so that you can navigate your career with intention and ultimately have the outcomes that you want. So here's the thing. No one, and I mean no one that I come in contact with in my work ever says to me, I'm not performing well and I don't deserve a promotion. Everyone says to me, I'm knocking it out of the park. I'm doing excellent. Everybody loves me. My boss loves me, and I deserve a promotion. Okay, that's what everyone says. So if you're a VP or director or even senior manager, you likely see yourself as someone who's a high performer. Okay, you're delivering results. You are trusted. You are valued. You're likely also signaling, whether explicitly or implicitly, you're signaling to your leadership that you want more. You're ready for the next role. You're ready for your next promotion. You want more impact. You want a bigger title. You want a broader remit. You want a bigger team. And who are we kidding? You want more money. Okay, you want more money. So that if that's you, then this topic applies to you. And so when you bring this topic up to your leadership and you have this conversation with them about you wanting more, you may be hearing one of the following things. Okay, yeah, you're definitely doing great work, but we need to wait for the budget to open up. There is a freeze right now. We need to open up the budget. Okay, we have to wait for that. We need to get you more in front of the XCOM or the board, right? That's another thing you may be hearing. We need to wait for this restructuring to be done and to be, let's just wait this out because there's a big restructuring happening right now. So let's wait this out and see what happens. That might be another feedback that you're hearing. Or worse yet, you may be hearing, we need to wait for the role to open up. Right now, you're looking for a VP role. There are no VP roles. So let's wait and see what opens up next year. Okay. So I hope I'm not triggering any like PTSD if this is something that you're hearing consistently, but that may be what is happening for you, is that you're hearing one or more of these things being said to you when the topic of you being promoted comes up. Okay. Now, let me be very, very clear. Let me say something very clearly. You likely already know this if you've been listening to me for a while. Okay. Your company is likely not in the business of promotions. That's not why they're in business. Okay. Your company is likely not in the business of promoting people. Promotions, especially the kind of promotion we're talking about to VP, SVP, and the C-suite, promotions at this level are exceptions. And I really want you to let that sink in. Like, take this away from you and let this sink in. Okay. Promotions are not a given. They're not an entitlement. These are exceptions that are being made. Your company didn't start its business to promote people. They're not in the business of promoting people. I know sometimes when we want something, that's all we can see and that's all we know and that's what we focus on. But it would behoove you to really think about this more broadly and think about this. It's almost like, I spent a lot of my career negotiating. I was in supply chain for a while. And so I did procurement. And when you're negotiating, one of the most important things for you to do is understand the mindset of the other person on the other side, the other party. It behooves you to understand the other party here, so to speak, right? Your leadership, your company, your HR, they didn't begin the business to promote. As a result, promotions are exceptions, which means everyone's not going to get promoted. Most people won't get promoted. And even rarely so at the level that we're talking about, the VP, the SVP, the C-suite, those are infinitesimal compared to the magnitude of people in the organization. Every once in a while, you have to reground yourself in that fact. You have to zoom out and reground yourself in that, because otherwise you will become disillusioned. Okay, you have to understand how rare what we're talking about here really is. And I often joke with our clients, I'm like, I know we land promotions in our programs every single day, but let's not lose sight of the fact that this is rare. This is not common. This is not commonplace, out there. So you have to understand that. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to make very clear, is that this is not something your company does as a matter of course. This is something that truly is an exception, and especially so at the levels that we're talking about. Okay, and that's the thing, is at those levels, at the level of VP, SVP, and the C-suite, you are going to have more interested parties, is what I call it. Interested parties, people who are interested in a promotion, than serious contenders. You're going to have way more, disproportionately more interested parties than serious contenders. Okay? An interested party is someone who's just interested in promotion. A serious contender is someone who is truly being considered, who is truly seen as contending for the role. Okay? So you have to know that. And so what does that mean for your manager? Put yourself in your manager's shoes. You might be a manager yourself. Put yourself in those shoes, right? What does that mean for your manager? Your manager's job is not just to figure out who's going to get promoted. That's actually the easy part of the job. If you're a manager of people, that's the easy part, is figuring out who will get the promotion. The hard part is figuring out how to keep the other people who are high performers engaged, how not to lose them, because they're not getting promoted. They're not seen as a next level contender, but yet they're required for the work that's being done. You don't want to lose those people. That's the job of a manager. That's the hard part. If you have 10 people and a space for one, and you know who that one is going to be, they're going to stand out. You're going to know who that person is. And then the other 9, maybe there's like 7 of them that you're like, oh, okay, but there's 2 that you're like, we can't lose these people. But they're not ready for the next level. I want you to really understand that, because if you don't, you will think there's something else happening. You'll think there's something nefarious going on, and you'll be taking them at their word when they tell you it's the budget and I'm going to get to that here in a moment, but I want you to know that that is your manager's job. That's what keeps them up at night, is trying to figure out how to not only identify who's going to get promoted, they've got that, but who isn't going to get promoted, and how do I keep those other people engaged and performing, right? Keep their performance up, right, in their current job. So that's really important. Okay, and this is where a lot of people end up stalled. A lot of those 7 or 10 or 9 people end up stalled in the conversation. They're over there asking, and those 2 that are really high performers, that are really close, they really think they should get it, those 2, they're stalled at that stage, because they're having the conversation about growth and about promotion, and their manager is hitting them with again, we need to find the right role for you. We need to figure out this budget situation. We need to get through this restructuring, right? All the while they're kind of on ice, right? That's what's happening here. Maybe you're one of those 2 people. Maybe you are in that camp. Okay, so that's really important, because there are 2 things that you need for promotion. A promotion requires 2 things. If you want to be promoted to a senior leadership role or an executive role, 2 things have to be true. Okay. Number 1 is promotion readiness. Promotion readiness. If you've been to my boot camp, you've heard me talk about this many times. Promotion readiness needs to be true. If you're not seen as promotion ready, you won't be promoted. And number 2 is an undeniable business case. You need both of those, promotion readiness and business case. Now ask yourself, as a manager, if you are a manager, which of those 2 things do you think is easier to talk about when you have a strong performer? If you have a strong performer, a high performer who's wants a promotion, and you know that they are a performer, but they're not ready, which of those 2 conversations you think is easier to have? The you're not ready conversation, or the let's wait for the budget, let's wait for the restructuring, which of those? Of course, the latter, the business case. The budget, it's easier. Those are more, it's a more comfortable conversation to have. The budget, the head count, the timing, the restructuring, the right role. These are safe. They're objective. They're low risk explanations for why this person hasn't been promoted. But that's not really the reason. Because the bottom line is, even if there was a budget, even if the restructuring wasn't happening, okay, even if the timing was quote unquote right, you still wouldn't promote that person. And that's what's happening here. It's easier to hide, quote unquote, hide behind the business case conversation, the budget conversation, the restructuring conversation, the hiring freeze conversation. It's easier to hide behind those than to have the tough conversation about why a high performer is not considered, a contender or seen as high potential for the level. And this is the thing you have to understand. If we're talking about analysts and managers and even a senior manager role, that's easier, okay? By the time you get to a high performer at the director level, a high performer at the VP level, these are truly high performers. They have beat the odds through all of the ranks up to that point. You're talking about the best of the best, okay? Usually, not all the time. Okay, not all the time. Some people have gotten there due to other things, but generally speaking, you're talking to some really, and even if they're not the best of the best, they figured out how to survive. They figured out how to keep going. So I take that back. Most of the time, these are people who are, just amazing at what they do in some way, shape, or form. It could be their functional expertise, but it could also be their ability to relate and to build relationships across multiple organizations. Either way, somehow they have made it this far. So you're dealing with the cream of the crop in the organization. And yet, just because you are seen as a strong performer, as a vice president, does not make you an undeniable C-suite leader. Just because you're seen as a high performer, as a director, does not make you an undeniable fit for vice president. Do you see that? They're not the same. Those are not the same jobs. So strength in your role at your level does not immediately translate into, a no-brainer choice for the next level. And that's the thing you have to understand. And that's the tough conversation that needs to happen that often does not happen because, again, your company is not in the business of promoting people. That's not why they hung up their shingle, was to promote. So you're asking for an exception conversation, right? So again, you have to understand that this is oftentimes not about the business case. In fact, that becomes the mask. It becomes the easy excuse. But that's not the real reason. And you know why I know this? A lot of times people come to me and they'll say, my manager had been telling me for years, for months, for 18 months, for 2 years, for 12 months, that it was just a matter of the budget. It's just a matter of finding the right role, blah, blah, blah. And then guess what? Somebody left. The role did in fact open up. An opportunity for VP did in fact come up. They did not invite me. I didn't even know. I wasn't invited to interview at all. They hired someone outside. They hired my peer. That's how you know. I have the evidence for this, right? So I'm sharing this with you now, as uncomfortable as it might be for you to hear it, especially if you're in this position, right now. It's important for you to know so that you can course correct. You can make different decisions, okay? You have to understand the mindset of the other party so that you can navigate this with intention. It is a lot harder to have the conversation honestly about promotion readiness to somebody who's not considered ready for VP, SVP, or the C-suite, okay? It's a lot easier to focus on the business case, the restructuring, the budget, but all the while, the real culprit is promotion readiness. So what's your job? I'm gonna boil this down. What's your job? Your job is to cut through the noise. It's to cut through the praise. It's to cut through the platitudes that you are hearing consistently and figure out exactly how you are perceived. That's not easy. And we help our clients do this every day through figuring out the right questions to ask, through the tenacity and the consistency, right? You have to frame the questions in a certain way to get better results and better outcomes, better answers, right? But that's your job, is to figure out the truth of how you're seen. Cut through the BS, cut through the platitudes, cut through all the praise and the credit that you're getting on all the work that you're doing, and keep doing what you're doing. You're doing great. Well, you're doing great for the work you're doing now. You're doing great for the level you're in now. Are you doing great for the next level? I tell you, you won't get that job until you are seen as operating unmistakably at that level. You will not land a C-suite role. You will not land a VP role. You won't land SVP. You won't even land senior director unless you are seen as unmistakably performing at that level. If that's not there, you will hear about budgets, you'll hear about restructuring, you'll hear about timelines. What you won't hear is you are now promoted. Your new title is now XYZ ABC, right? So your job is to cut through all the nonsense, right? Not saying that you should not bask in the praise and the credit that you're getting from your boss. I'm saying you have to be more savvy than that. You have to be more savvy. You didn't come here to play. This is your career. This is your growth that we're talking about. You have to ask better questions. You know, sometimes, and this is a side note, but sometimes I'll be talking to someone and they'll say to me, I had a meeting with my boss and my boss said XYZ ABC about my growth and my development. They said they wanted to see me do more of this or do more of that. And then I'll say, well, what does that mean? Do you understand what they said? And they'll say to me, no, I did. Well, why did you leave the conversation if you don't understand what they said? If you don't fully get that, how do you plan to action it when you didn't understand? The conversation is for your benefit. So start there. Don't leave conversations prematurely if you don't understand what this means, what you're going to do with it, and how this leads you to your next outcome, to your goal, right? When you're having your review conversations, don't waste your time. Don't be in there checking the box just to check the box that you had the conversation. Meanwhile, there are real answers that you need that you haven't figured out how to ask for, right? In a sense, you're letting your boss off easy. This is their job, is to have these conversations with you, right? And so when you go in there and they give you something that's very sort of poorly thought out or, well, this and that, and then you say, okay, great. And then you go back to your desk and then somebody else asks you, well, what about this? And you're like, I don't know, I didn't think about that. You were unprepared. You were unprepared. And quite frankly, at the levels that we're talking about, a VP, SVP, and the C-suite, you ought to know. You ought to know what the job is. You ought to know what the brand is. You ought to know what it would look like to be perceived at that level. That's inherent in the job, right? That's inherent in the job. So this is, I mean, like I said, if I were talking to analysts and managers, I'd be taking a completely different approach, completely different tone, completely different level of urgency. But at this level, you have to know that this is not just about, I'm not calling into question your performance and your credentials and your accolades and all the multiple awards you've won throughout the years and all the stuff that you've garnered over the time that you've been there. That's all well and good. But you wouldn't be listening to me this long if you did not desire more, desire a promotion, desire a title change, desire more impact. And this conversation is about how to move you forward in that direction, okay? Because if we don't figure out the truth of how you are perceived in your organization, if we don't figure that out, your promotion conversation, despite how many times you've had it, despite how many multiple meetings that you've had with your leadership about your growth and your development, that conversation hasn't really started. If you don't figure out how you're being perceived, your promotion conversation has not begun. I hope that you found this insightful and helpful, that it gave you something else to think about, give you a different perspective, so that now you can move forward with clarity and conviction as you discuss your career with your leadership, so that come, before the end of this year, you are now in that seat. You are now in that role. And of course, if you would like more support, if you would like the strategy, the scripts on how to have the conversations, the questions that you ought to be asking, and how to overall design your brand within your organization so that you are, in fact, that undeniable fit. That's exactly what we do inside our Catapult programs. So get in touch with us by clicking the link in the show notes. See you soon.